This is a post that is the result of a lot of reflection and study of subjects spanning areas of psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy. It synthesizes this information and it puts it into one big framework. It's got a lot of my personal experiences melded into it as well. And the core thing that I'm trying to answer is how to have great relationships. There's a lot of advice on the internet that you see. There's a lot of common advice that you hear from friends and family, and it all revolves around the boilerplate standard stuff of honesty, communication. I feel like we all get that at this point, but there is something deeper that no one really talks about, that I believe I have a fresh take on it, and I would love to share it with you guys. Before I get into those details though, I feel like I must also explain what spurred this video, what made me want to make this in the first place. You see, today is my 28th birthday. I turned 28 today, and if someone told me last year that 2023 would be going this way, I would have been shit scared. In the last 11 months, I moved to a new country. I broke up with my girlfriend of 9 years. I am navigating one of the toughest job markets in the last 15 years or so. I would say since the 2008 recession, this is the toughest market to be in, and perhaps even tougher because of the effects of COVID. And this is right as I graduate business school. In the last year, I have felt lonelier than I've ever felt in my life. And so all of these things combined have been one major emotional challenge to deal with. In short, this year removed all trappings of what I thought were achievements, things that I had thought that I had built for myself, this image I had built for myself in the last few years. It just stripped me down to my bare bones. It made me reflect a lot on who I am as a person, but most importantly, it made me reflect on my relationships. It made me think about them a lot, which is why I'm posting this video. But I also must explain what this video is not. This video is not standard advice, like I said, about friendships or relationships, of communication, honesty, respect. We've heard that too many times. You all get it. No, this is about something much deeper. This is about understanding ourselves. I love this Sun Tzu quote from The Art of War that says, "The general that understands himself and his enemy, as well as the battleground on which he fights, wins all wars. The general that only understands himself and not his enemy wins half of them. And the general that understands not himself, not his enemy, nor the battleground on which he fights, loses all of them except due to luck." Now, if you were to just replace the word general and enemy by me, my partner, my friend, any person that you have a relationship with, and apply that, it's the same thing, it's the same concept. I feel that mostly there's a lack of self-awareness that causes the demise of many beautiful friendships and relationships, causes strain in them. And this is something that not too many people focus on, being self-aware, understanding themselves better, understanding the person they're talking to better. There's this emotional sensitivity that most of us lack because it's a very hard skill to develop. And it's not something that most people are good at. It's either something that you're good at, naturally speaking, but even then, unless you consciously work at it, it's not like you're going to get any better more than your natural tendencies allow you to. And so that's what I really want to dig into with this video. You see, in the aftermath of my relationship ending, I was terrified about what was going to happen to me. I have so many friends who, even months and years after breaking up with their spouse, significant other, partner, long-term relationship, they just haven't been able to move on. In fact, a month or so ago, I spoke with somebody who broke up with someone about 2 years ago. And they say they still feel unable to move on. They still feel stuck. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you have at least one friend, or maybe you're in this category yourself, who feels this way. And so for me personally, even when I was in the fog of grief, I only told myself one thing: I will not be stuck. And so I tried to find out things. I tried to, even talking to these friends, I tried to figure out what they did in the aftermath of their relationship. And whatever they told me, I did the exact opposite. So most of the advice was, yeah, go on dating apps, start swiping left and right, distract yourself. Go and meet other people, go to parties, just go out, go for a holiday, do stuff that will distract you. And I did the exact opposite. I sat at home, I stayed alone for the next 3 weeks or so. I went on long walks, I started meditating, I started going to the gym every single day, I started eating healthy. I started going to therapy as well, and that helped a lot. All of these things combined helped me form a lens to view the situation, which was healthier than distracting myself would have been. And so all I did was I sat in the suffering, I sat in the pain, and I didn't distract myself. And while it was short term, extremely painful, I feel it's helped me progress to a level where I feel like I'm processing things very, very healthily compared to if I had not done those things. And once I started to do everything in that regard, that's when things started to change in my mind. That's when I started to think about what exactly can I do to make my relationships better. Because once the dust settled, and this is very important when your mind is so muddy, it's not like you can take decisions, it's not like you can think very clearly. So the best thing you can do is just calm yourself down. That's what I realized. And so when the dust settled, I realized that my big takeaway was that love is not everything. Friendship is not everything. In any good relationship, and I'm talking from a romantic relationship point of view, but you can extrapolate it to any other relationship as well. You need chemistry, sure. You need compatibility. You need shared values for a good, long-lasting relationship. These are the building blocks, but we don't tend to think about that. Most romantic relationships that go wrong tend to go wrong because the two people in it just tend to overvalue chemistry and don't think enough about compatibility. At least when you're young, that's what happens. Most of you might say that this is obvious, but this was not obvious to me. That's the thing. I've realized it's always like this, that things that are painfully obvious to others are your blind spots. But anyway, I was still left asking myself after this entire thing, what it meant. How could I translate it into a philosophy for myself? Because I had that high level understanding of what you need in a good relationship, but I couldn't distill it into a philosophy for myself. And that's what I wanted to do. At the core, there was this burning question: how can I have great relationships? And this led me down multiple rabbit holes, which I've synthesized together to build a framework. And this isn't just applicable to romantic relationships, as I say, it applies to any relationship. You can use this to deepen your friendships, your family relationships, your relationships with your parents. Honestly, this has helped me so much in just the month or so, in the short time that I have started internalizing this, just to form an initial belief system for myself, just to not be bitter despite the negative outcomes of the last year, to just be positive about the future. The short gist of this entire video, if you feel like you don't want to watch till the end, is that you must know yourself. You must know the people you enter into relationships with, friendships with. Get curious. Most people aren't. It's a constant effort to have a high fidelity view of what the other person is like, as well as present a high fidelity view of yourself so that they can evaluate whether they want to stick around with you long term. You understand this as the fundamental level, and that's essentially what this video is going to be about. Here's what I'm going to cover. I'm going to cover the neuroscience of love and grief. I went into understanding the brain and how it works, because I believe that's the fundamental building block. That's where things start. I I'm going to talk about how your personality is built, the concept of ego states. I'm going to talk about attachment theory, the theory of how you attract and why you attract certain people in your life. I'm going to talk about your emotional states. There's something called polyvagal theory. I'm going to talk about how attachment theory and polyvagal theory interrelate. So it talks about how you can understand your nervous systems better and how people who are in your life, how they affect it. I'm going to talk about how to regulate your emotions, how to regulate your nervous system. And in the last phase, I'm going to talk about building self-awareness. I'm going to talk about how to do that and what are some practical tips and tools that I have learned. All right, are you ready? Let's dive in. So first and foremost, let's talk about the neuroscience of love and grief. Essentially, what I'm trying to tell you is how the brain works. That's the thing, that as the dust started to settle, I started to think from first principles. I started reading about the brain and its working, because I said that I want to understand the way my mind is working right now, and I don't have enough information. But to understand how the mind works, let me start from, where thoughts originate, my brain. Without getting too academic, the most important thing I learned was that the brain is divided into 3 regions, which evolved in the following order. So this is the oldest to the youngest. The first thing is the reptilian brain. That's the brain stem. That's right at the base of your head right here. It's basically the first thing that came in. So it's basically in charge of your breathing. It's in charge of the involuntary things that your body does, like heartbeat, like controlling the amount of sweat that goes through your body and stuff like that. Stuff that you don't have to think about. That just happens on its own. That's essential for you to keep living. The second part is the limbic brain. So this is, for the context of this video, just remember it as this is where your emotions originate. This is the middle part of your brain. This came in after the brainstem. So this evolved after the reptilian brain. And the youngest part of the brain is the frontal brain. And so again, for the context of this video, just think of it as the rational thinking part of your brain. This is the part which is able to logically construct arguments or logically see through situations. So now, like I said, the brainstem basically responsible for survival activities. Limbic brain is responsible for things like muscle control, movement, spatial recognition, emotions. And the frontal brain is your rational thinking part. Now, essentially, like any sibling relationship, the youngest one doesn't really get a lot of airtime in the family. And so the youngest one, that is the rational part of your brain, the frontal brain, tends to get overwhelmed by the emotional responses, or if there's a tumultuous period in your life, or if you have an emotional spike driven by the limbic brain or the brainstem, that's when things get difficult. That's why a lot of people, when they're angered or they're in a heightened emotional state, they find it very difficult to make decisions because the frontal brain goes offline. And so this is the big realization that I had, that explained why for about 1.5 2 months after my breakup, I struggled to get out of bed and have a routine. My frontal brain completely checked out. It was overpowered by my limbic brain. And so my frontal brain, the part of the brain that plans, that's able to sort of help you go through life on a day-to-day basis, it just completely checked out. In fact, there are studies that even say that it shrinks in size. The part of your brain that's responsible for motivation, that's responsible for getting you up and running every single day, when you're going through something traumatic, when you're going through grief, it shrinks in size. And so no wonder when people are going through something really stressful or really traumatic, they aren't able to make good decisions. And sometimes that traumatic period can extend more than a couple of hours. It can be a couple of days, weeks, months, even years at times. This was a big realization for me personally. It really explained my behavior. But when it came to love, I learned something really strange as well. The way our brains react to addictive substances is the same way that we react when we are in love or at least in the initial stages. So this explains why couples go through the honeymoon phase of being infatuated with each other, and which again, it's a generalization, but this is why they tend to make silly decisions in the start of the relationship, because the limbic brain again has taken over from the frontal brain. And that's what I found very funny, that humans have evolved to optimize for chemistry. That's the survivalistic explanation. That's why this happens, that your limbic brain takes over. Your frontal brain wasn't really important when you were a caveman or a cavewoman. Thousands of years ago, it was important for you to procreate, and that's where chemistry took over. It wasn't important for you to stay long-term monogamous partners, which is the realm of compatibility. And so, as monogamy became the rule, as societies evolved, it started becoming more and more difficult for us, which is why we started to struggle. This isn't to say that you can't train your brain. The first step to training your brain, though, is realizing that this is everything that's happening in the background. And so this was, like I said, a really big realization for me, that the frontal brain will try to tell its elder siblings to think about things like the other person's personality type, their values, their way of thinking. Then the elder siblings, of course, tend to ignore it. They're like the bike riding, leather jacket wearing guys who just want to date the hottest women around. Their issues be it damned. And so we've all been there, at one or the other stage of our life. But the point is that once you realize this, you now know that this is how your brain works, and this is what you have to safeguard against. You can train your brain to a very large extent to listen to the frontal brain, to listen to the frontal part. This takes time and effort, but it can happen. It's not doom and gloom. So the point is to educate somebody who may not know about how the brain works in this detail, because I surely didn't. I learned all of this and this blew my mind. This, by the way, is called experience, which is something that, people tend to get too late regardless of when they get it. Another funny takeaway I have is that we have more negative emotions than we have positive emotions, and it's literally harder to be happy than it is to be sad. And we can thank evolution for this, because evolutionarily speaking, from a survival standpoint, negative emotions are much more useful than positive emotions are. Anyway, I feel like I've given you enough of an introduction about how the brain works. Let me talk to you one level further about psychology, and this is where things will start getting much more interesting and much more useful in a practical way. So let's talk about how your personality is built. There's this concept that was developed in 1958 by a psychologist called Eric Berne. He said that there are three ego states, three states of your own psychology. The first one is the parent state. These are things that you learn from your parents. These are behaviors or traits that you pick up by your parents or any authority figure really in your life. Any person that you might view as an authority figure, these are things you learn from them. The second is the child state. If you can think back to when you were really young, maybe you were 5 or 6, what were some things that you did without anyone prompting you? Some kids are really rambunctious. They just run around all the time. They're really outgoing, they're really friendly. Other kids are a little shyer. Some kids like to play by themselves. Some kids just have 1 or 2 special friends and they hang out with them all the time. And so these are things that kids by default do. That's your child state. Anything that you did as a child by default without being prompted, that's your child state. That's something that's innate to you. You came with that. Think of it like your mobile phone has a factory setting. Think of it like your factory setting. And so the point is that your child state is something that remains within you. It may be submerged. It may be pushed deep down if you're not really comfortable with what you were like back then, but it remains a part of you. And so it's important to be cognizant of that as well. And the third part is the adult state. That's essentially a synthesis of your child state and your parent state, where you're responding to the here and now. You're responding to things as are happening to you. And that's it. These are the 3 states. Now, understanding the 3 states really helped me to see that everybody has different personalities. Everybody has so many facets to themselves. This helped me to just think about everybody as What's everyone's child state like? What's their parent state like? And what's their adult state like? And how do they fix in together? And what about myself as well? Just thinking about this, or maybe talking to your friends about this, talking to your partner about this, is going to help you understand yourself much better, and it's going to help you understand them much better as well. This is the first sort of tool, concept that I would love for people to think more about or explore more about with their close friends. All right, that was about the first concept that I wanted to share. The second thing I want to talk about is something called attachment theory. Now, another popular psychological theory, I don't even remember when it was developed, but most modern relationships and dating advice is centered around attachment theory. There's books written on it, there's multiple podcasts on it, and being the complete novice in this field that I am, I hadn't heard of these things until like 3 months ago. I dived deep into all of these, I learned a lot, and I figured that reading about attachment theory really explained so much about myself, and when I related it to my friends, to my family, it explained so much about myself. Basically, attachment theory states that all adults exhibit 4 types of attachment traits in relationships. There's secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and disorganized attachment. You can think of these as 4 quadrants on a map: north, south, east, and west. And so just how you can go north, you can go south, you can go in one direction perfectly, or you could go into a mixture of directions. You could go north, south, northeast, or southwest, southwest. Exactly like that, you can have one or the other attachment types. People are dominant towards one or the other type of attachments, but then you also have a synthesis. You also have a mix. So it's a spectrum of attachment styles that you exhibit on average. And so the major outcome for me was firstly understanding how attachment theory works. Where does it come from? Which I'll explain shortly. But the other thing was understanding myself and my own attachment style, understanding the people I speak with, the kind of friends I hang out with. What kind of attachment styles do they exhibit? What kind of attachment style do my parents exhibit? Right? Because they influence so much you throughout your childhood and the kind of person you are like. And so relating attachment theory to yourself as well as to the people around you was a game changer. And I think it will be a game changer for you as well. So let me give you a quick brief about each attachment style. The first one is called secure attachment, which basically is the nicest sounding attachment style. To be securely attached in your relationships means that you trust your friends, your partners implicitly and completely. You're completely open, honest, communicative about your feelings, needs, and wants in a relationship. Now, most securely attached people had their needs consistently met during childhood, which is why they develop the right expectations, the correct expectations, that if they properly communicate their needs to their partner, their boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, or close friends, or even family members, people will fulfill them. They expect their needs to be fulfilled, and they also are responsible enough to understand what the other person's needs are and fulfill them. Needs here means things like when a child cries, do the parents soothe him or let him cry it out? Did he receive the appropriate amount of affection when he was growing up? Did he get fed on a regular schedule or whenever he was hungry? And many more. So needs talks about, if you want to understand what needs as a concept means, read about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a very popular concept. It basically talks about base level needs such as survival, such as shelter, such as food, nourishment, and then as the pyramid goes up, it talks about higher level needs such as love, affection, sexual needs. It talks about self-actualization as the highest need. And so I'm not here to suggest that little children may have all of those needs, but at least the basic needs such as food, shelter, affection, touch with parents, feeling safe, all of these things contribute to a feeling of safety for kids. And so securely attached people form a good concept of what safety looks like, form a healthy concept of what safety looks like. And they aren't afraid to walk away in relationships. They value what they bring to the table as well as their needs, and they know at a core level what healthy relationships feel like, because that's what they've seen mostly throughout their childhood. So they instinctively understand it, even if they may not know what attachment theory or the psychology or all of these details. Which is why they end up attracting like-minded people in their life, because that's the energy they're putting out, and anything else is simply filtered out. Now keep in mind, secure attachment is the goal, but it's definitely not the destination. It's a utopic concept. No one is completely 100% securely attached. We all are human. We all have insecurities. And even if someone is overall securely attached, they tend to lean slightly towards one of the other attachment styles. So I'll get into that now. The second style is called an avoidant attachment style. Now, avoidants tend to disengage from those around them in order to protect themselves. They generally are those kind of people that have their guard up. They did not have their needs met as a child and tended to withdraw into themselves as a response, which then shows up as avoidance in their personality as they grow up. So if you were a kid who was generally quiet, who was not too very bothered about the comings and goings of your parents, chances are, perhaps, and I'm not trying to therapize anyone, but chances are that those were the first signs of being avoidant. Avoidants get into relationships with their guard up, and they have a hard time being vulnerable, which is really essential to forming good relationships, friendships with anyone, right? They have an aversion towards being hurt and would rather stay with their guard up, stay inside of themselves so that it's safe, instead of getting really close to somebody. Now, men typically tend to exhibit avoidant tendencies more on average. That's why you have that stereotype of, the guy who doesn't commit and the girl who thinks that, she can change him. And so why is that a very attractive stereotype? Because somewhere or the other, that guy has developed an avoidant style because of his parenting. And it also speaks a lot about the person who's attracted to that kind of avoidance. I'm sorry, I'm getting a WhatsApp message from people here. Yeah. So as I was saying, it also speaks a lot about the kind of person who's attracted to that energy. And that's typically something that fulfills a gap in their life as well. That's typically something that they have seen from one of their parents. So if you're attracted to avoidance, it may be that one of your parents was an avoidant, and that that's what constitutes as safety for you. That's what your mind thinks is safe, and that's what you're attracted to, and vice versa, right? I'll get into that a little bit more in detail as I go forward. So that's avoidant. The third style is anxious attachment. So again, this is due to unmet needs in childhood. Anxiously attached people have an intense need to feel connected to others. In the extreme case, think of the stereotype of that really clingy guy or really clingy girlfriend who always wants to be around her friends, his friends or partner, doesn't allow them any space. Not everyone fits that extreme though. So as a rule of thumb, anxious attachment simply means that you tend to consistently overlook your own needs in a relationship in order to maintain the relationship. Now, anxious attachment in children gets exhibited when they become visibly uncomfortable if their caregivers leave the room, let's say, or they're separated for a prolonged period from their caregivers. These kids don't explore, play with other kids or adults as easily, and they prefer to remain very close to their caregivers, to their parents. And those are generally the first signs of anxious attachment. And of course, in the future, this may correct itself, it may not, but this is one of those typical stereotypical things that you read about once you start reading about anxious attachment. Like I said, the stereotype for avoidance was that most men are avoidants, many men are avoidants on average. With anxious attachment, the stereotype again is that, on average, women are more anxiously attached than men, but I know plenty of men that lean anxious. For me as well, overall I am securely attached, but I tend to lean anxious at times. So I'm somewhere on that spectrum of secure and anxious. The last one is disorganized attachment, which may not apply to a lot of you watching this video, but it basically results from it's basically because of a deep trauma and neglect in childhood. I want to highlight that there's big capital T trauma, uppercase trauma. That's what this is. That, it could be, think of abusive parents, think of children of drug addicts, that kind of trauma. And so disorganized people tend to display a whole mix of different responses. So it could be a mix of anxiety and avoidance. They don't develop healthy responses to social situations, which is why they display a mix of aggression towards others. They don't tend to trust others. They tend to see them as foes, and they also withdraw into themselves a lot. It's very difficult. So they see others more as a threat. They're seen as social pariahs. And so if you think you might be someone who fits this category, or if you know someone who fits this category, it's best to get some licensed therapist help. It's best to get some real help for this. All right, let's talk about applying the attachment styles to relationships. This is the part of the video at 31 minutes in where it's going to start becoming practical. Things that you can start doing. First of all, you can exhibit different attachment styles. No one is completely secure or completely avoidant or anxious, like I said. And many people tend to display anxious avoidance, anxious dismissive styles as well. Anxious avoidance are, they crave connection, but they can't bring themselves to bring their guard down. They want to be close to somebody, but they can't bring themselves to take help from anyone. They would rather rely on themselves, which is like the ultimate paradox, right? The anxious dismissive people, they exhibit heightened emotional responses. They will stay aloof from most people, and they're generally regarded as antisocial. So what does this mean for you? Ask yourself, what kind of attachment style do you think you exhibit? Think about your childhood. Try and relate your behaviors between then and now. You'll probably have some new realizations about yourself. I sure did. Just start thinking, what kind of people are you attracted to? What attachment styles do they exhibit? Is there a pattern? A little boy who grew up around an overbearing mother who was really anxious and didn't let him out of her sight might grow up to be attracted to women that display that level of anxiety or are somewhere on that same spectrum. Or a little girl who grew up around an avoidant father may grow up to be attracted to men who are avoidant or display the same kind of tendencies. Or it might be the opposite. It manifests in strange ways, but there's always a reason that you can perhaps root back into your childhood or your early years that explains a lot about your behavior. So the point is that if you start thinking about this, if you start thinking about these themes, there's going to be so much that you will figure out about yourself. And we like to laugh off the fact that so many people end up with partners that behave like one of their parents or look like their parents, and we call it that it's creepy and it's weird. And sure, I get that, but there's also a deeper psychological concept behind it that we don't think about, that of safety. Every human being, really, all we're trying to do is come to that feeling of psychological safety, and whatever recreates that's what we try and hold on to in our lives, and that's what we try and attract in our lives. The core thing is, how do we make safety something that is healthy? How do we rewire our brains if the concept of safety is not healthy in our brains? How do we rewire it so that safety becomes something that is good for us in the long run when it comes to the kind of people we hang out with, the friends, family, or even the kind of partner we attract into our lives. So do this exploration with your close friends or your partner, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. Ask them to think about this, and I'm sure you'll find it useful. Now, there's a third concept of nervous system states or understanding your emotional states that's from the polyvagal theory that I want to talk about. And this really ties in all of the information I gave you before this. So once you understand this, everything will start to make sense. You see, as per this theory, each of us fits into 3 nervous system states. We all vary, our nervous system states vary between these 3 at times. The first one is called ventral. That's where you're feeling calm, you're feeling relaxed. Imagine yourself in the morning, you've gotten up, it's a bright sunny day, you're feeling relaxed and refreshed, you're having a cup of coffee. You're in the ventral state where you're just feeling calm and relaxed. You're feeling safe, right? That's where the concept of safety comes in. Then you have the concept of sympathetic nervous system. That's your fight or flight response. So imagine you're just walking down the road and all of a sudden somebody jumps out at you from a dark alleyway. You're in a fight or flight response mode, right? You're either going to run, you're going to fight. Your body has this rush of adrenaline. That's your sympathetic state. And so it might be that you realize that guy's a robber. At that time, you either fight them, or you run away from them, or you realize it's your friend. And then that pattern gets broken, and then eventually you go back to being in ventral. You go back to feeling normal. The other thing is that you realize, oh no, they're a robber, and they overpower you. And then at that point, you may go into a third state, which is called dorsal. Dorsal simply means you're paralyzed, you're almost catatonic. It's a pain avoidance response in the face of overwhelming threat. So imagine, you're a caveman thousands of years ago, you're walking down a pathway and suddenly a bear pounces on you and it's about to rip your throat out. It's a pretty dark example that I'm giving in the middle of a video about relationships, but just bear with me. And so at that moment, what the normal response that the body generates is you just lie dead. You just go into shutdown. And that's a pain avoidance response. You don't want to flail about. You don't want to fight it out. You just want it to be over quickly. That's called dorsal state. Now, if you start relating this survivalistic thing to our modern day, we don't really have many life endangering moments these days. So it's not really like we need the sympathetic and dorsal state to kick in so actively, but it's just a survival thing that, our body still sees it as very, very important. And so when I relate these to my current day, I think about that, I'm in ventral most of the times when I'm in the morning. I've just woken up, I've maybe had a cup of coffee, I journal, I meditate, I'm feeling the most calm and relaxed. Sympathetic, I feel that the last couple of months I spent were in a prolonged state of sympathetic nervous response. And that was post my breakup, because that explains why I felt the need to hit the gym 5 to 6 times a week, go on hour-long walks every day. The intense need to do so has reduced somewhat, but it was really helpful in the first few months. And so a key factor of the sympathetic nervous state is that you need to mobilize. That's fight or flight, right? You either fight or you run away. You're doing something with your body. You're mobilizing that energy. And so when you undergo trauma, when you undergo some sort of stress, your body from the ventral state can either go into dorsal or goes into sympathetic. And depending on what state you are in, you have to develop a certain type of response to get out of that state. That's what I'm going to talk about. But for me, it meant that because I was in a prolonged sympathetic state, I believe, after having researched and read all of this, that this is why I felt the immense need to mobilize myself, to get that energy literally out of my body by exercising way harder than I have ever in my life, by going out a lot, by walking outdoors a lot. And then there's this other state called dorsal that I believe that in my life, I've experienced a few times where last maybe 4 years, I worked with a tough as nails boss. He was ex-military and he was really on me. For 4 years, I learned the most under him, but it wasn't a pleasant experience by any means. I'm usually a super early riser, so I wake up around 4:30 or 5 every day, but sometimes the stress of that job would just get to me. Sometimes I'd wake up with zero motivation and go to sleep again. And that's the closest to a dorsal nervous system that I can think of being in. Dorsal, like I said, just means that you just don't have motivation. It can show up as when people go through grief for a prolonged period of time. That's how dorsal nervous system state shows up. And sometimes you can tend to get stuck in one or these other nervous system states. And the aim is to move back towards ventral. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So how do you regulate your nervous system states? I have a few practical things that I have learned for myself and started implementing that I think you'll find useful. First thing, start observing your nervous system states throughout the day. Just start maintaining a log. Just journaling every day is a really helpful activity, as that's the biggest guideline that I can give you for anything that I say. Journaling is the most helpful thing. So just becoming observant and just making a journal of how you felt throughout the day. What caused your nervous system states to change? What caused you to feel anxious, or what caused you to feel depressed, or what caused you to feel happy, and what were the triggers? Just becoming cognizant of that, and the fact that you start writing it will make your brain recognize it while it's happening in real time over the next couple of weeks. And that's probably after a few weeks, you won't even feel the need to write it down. You'll instantly recognize it, you'll see the patterns, and that's when you can move on to the next step, which is figuring out what state you're in and sort of manipulating your body to move away from that. So if you're in dorsal, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling lack of motivation, doing a bit of movement, going out for a walk, doing a few push-ups, a workout can really help. For some people, just sort of doing some sort of breath work helps. For some people, some sort of meditation helps. It's different. But just getting out of your body, moving around is very helpful. If you're in sympathetic, you need to firstly get rid of that excess energy. But also, for me personally, journaling and meditation helped a lot. It helped me get out of my brain, get out of my thoughts and put it out on a piece of paper. Or, perhaps not even think, just calm down. Taking a few deep breaths, centering yourself, all of these things help. It could be just like having your favorite cup of tea that calms you down, right? And so these are just guidelines. You have to figure out what works best for you. It could be that what helps you get out of sympathetic state is completely not useful for someone else, right? So it's very subjective. But the point is that once you know this, once you know that you can manipulate your body to move towards ventral, that's when you start experimenting. And regulating the nervous system is a lot like going to the gym. So, you start with lighter dumbbells and then you work your way up the rack. You don't start with the 40 kg dumbbells right away, because you're going to just hurt yourself. That's all that's going to happen. And so similarly, start with small steps. If you're going through trauma, the first couple of days, my only aim was to just get through the day. After I broke up, the first couple of weeks, my goal was, all right, can I go about my day like in at least with a semblance of normalcy? Can I at least go about my day with not making myself a complete and utter social pariah? Just if I have made a promise to a friend to go and meet them, let me go and meet them. And that will be the one thing I do every day. So every day I said, there's one thing I want to do, there's one thing I want to achieve, and I'll do that. And it could be as simple as going for a walk. It could be as simple as going to meet a friend for dinner. It could be as simple as finishing this task for my dad that I promised them, anything, right? And then over the next month or so, I started slowly going back towards my routine and upping the intensity a little bit, little by little. And that helped me, because progressive overload is the thing. And moving yourself from this sympathetic or dorsal state that you're in back to ventral takes time. It varies. The point is that I couldn't think about what to do in that heightened emotional state. I had to allow myself to settle down, to move towards ventral. It took me like a month, 2 months to move back to that state. until then, I couldn't really have thought about the situation much. I couldn't really have found solutions. Most people tend to go into solutioning right away, which is not productive, right? So don't try to think through these situations. If you're going through a difficult time, firstly, just understand what nervous system state are you in, and try and get yourself back to feeling as normal as possible, as ventral as possible. And that's when the next step comes, which is the final step in my video, which is building self-awareness. Everything I've talked about so far has been leading to this point. The main reason you would want to learn any of the tools I've been speaking of is because you want to be self-aware, because you completely want to understand yourself, and as an extension, your partner, your friends, your family, etc. Being observant of yourself is step 1. Step 2 is learning to regulate yourself. Finally, step 3 is getting to the root cause of the issue. Anytime I'm triggered, once I calm down and I'm slightly more regulated, I ask myself, what triggered me about the situation? Why did I react to that? And the answers don't come right away. Don't expect answers to come right away. The point is to do this exercise over and over again, get enough data in your brain, and eventually the patterns will start matching. You'll start understanding more about yourself. So again, journaling in this regard helped me a lot. It helped me put all that information onto a piece of paper. I didn't have to hold it on in my brain. And then there's something about just writing that helps you suss out what's in your mind. It's very helpful. So try it. The second thing that I want to suggest is something called inner child therapy. It's just about reparenting yourself. And this is a big one. This is something I'm still learning about, so I won't talk about it too much. But the basic concept is that every child faces some or the other sort of trauma that manifests in certain ways as they grow up. Now, trauma here, I'm not talking about stuff like, your parents were abusive, you had an alcoholic father, none of that. It's just the fact that it's virtually impossible for a child's needs to be met completely. And when I talk about needs, I'm talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs that I briefly spoke about. Maybe it could be that your parents were really busy. They were traveling all the time, or a lot of the time. And as a child, you felt that you should have been there a lot more than they actually were. But, just a matter of practicality, they could not do everything that you needed at that time. And so you developed coping mechanisms around it. You developed a way of personality around it. And that's absolutely fine. This is not to place blame on any parenting. But the point is that as you become an adult, it's your job to figure out what unmet needs you have and what kind of coping mechanisms you've developed around that. And so inner child therapy really means just understanding that. Just talking to your younger self, your younger you, and relating that to how you are today, and reparenting yourself, being the kind of parent that you deserved as a child, that you needed but didn't really get. It builds a lot of compassion, it builds a lot of empathy within yourself. And I've been doing hacky stuff like I haven't been working with an inner child therapist. I intend to do it in the next couple of months to sort of delve deeper into all of those things. But very, very simple things that I learned by researching is just have photographs of yourself as a small child. I have my phone screensaver these days is a set of photos of me aged 6 to 9 years, and it helps me connect with the younger me in a strange way. After about a month or so of doing, sort of just looking at the photograph and just thinking, okay, what do you want? What do you want to talk about? Or just thinking about that time of my life, that phase of my life, what I was like, what was going through my life at that point, what was I thinking, what were the major events that I remember, how did that affect me? Trying to talk to that little me, that became an exercise that I did every day over the last 1, 2, 3 months. And that really helped me. I mean, strangely, today I feel a weird sense of parental love for that earlier version of myself, if that makes sense. And as a result, it's helped me develop a lot of compassion for myself. It's helped me view myself much less judgmentally than I did earlier. It's also helped me view others much more compassionately. It's helped, honestly, I'm amazed at how much it's helped me in such a short period of time. And I haven't even worked with someone who's experienced in this field. I'm sure the gains are going to be much bigger once I start doing that. And so my 3 big takeaways from this entire last couple of months, this journey, is that firstly, trauma doesn't have to be big. Everybody's childhood affects them in some way or the other, and most people don't unpack that. It affects everything from the partner you choose, your personality, your likes, dislikes, the kind of friends you hang out with, the energy you put out in the world. And so essentially the second thing is that you should learn to reparent yourself. Now, I think that if the above is true, if everybody goes through some trauma or the other that they don't process, understanding that and learning to reparent themselves is probably something that makes sense for everyone to do at some point or the other in their life. It's going to help everyone just be more self-aware. And lastly, I think people just need to be curious. And a lot of people get triggered and flail about, when something emotional happens. I mean, that's a very natural response. That's a human thing. That's what everyone does. But developing the right tools to regulate yourself emotionally, ask yourself, why am I doing this? Journaling, learning about inner child therapy, attachment styles, etc. They all really helped me, and I'm sure they will help you as well. All right. Here's the last bit. Everything I said applies to you, but you can also apply it, like I said, to people around you. And now, this isn't a call to psychoanalyze anyone. This isn't a call to therapize anyone. You shouldn't do that. Rather, it's a call for you to develop genuine compassion, genuine empathy for others. That's the end goal. To be less judgmental about yourself, about others. And now that I understand so much, I know at a fundamental level where my last relationship went wrong. I don't need to look for closure. In fact, my sense of compassion and empathy for myself, for her, has only increased in the last couple of months, and that is closure in and of itself. We both tried our level best, but the combined best was just not enough. That's it. There's this concept that I heard recently on a podcast. Tony Robbins speaks about the 4 stages of love. And he says the first stage is baby love. You take. You just care about taking. And when your needs aren't met, you start crying. And then the second stage is tit for tat. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's very quid pro quo. And honestly, that's probably where a lot of adult relationships are. The third is giving love. You're like, I'm going to give to you because that's who I am as a person. That's what I do. And that's just it. That's all I'm going to do. That's the mindset with which I go in. And that's the healthy state. That's where, everybody should be. Now, the fourth stage is spiritual love, where, you love with zero expectations. You might not even meet them. It might be that they hate you. It's all about loving anyone and everyone, even if they're your enemy. Probably only the most spiritually realized people will be able to do that. If you're going into monk mode, probably you can do that. Yeah, but for most of us, it seems really illogical. Now, I'm always someone who likes to be in stage 3, but these days I'm particularly interested about what stage 4 looks like. And so this situation in the last couple of months really presented an opportunity for me to try what that would be. And I don't think that would have been possible for me to even think about without doing all the work I've outlined in this video. I don't think without doing all of the work it would have been possible for me to at least start on this journey of feeling deeply okay regardless of what happens in my life. Alright, that's all I have to say on this topic. If you managed to stick through till the end of this video, I thank you so much. I sincerely hope that it helps you in some way or the other. Even if it helps one person, it would have been worth all this effort for me to pen down all of my thoughts, make a video out of it. Yeah, that's about it. Let me know if this video helps you, and let me know if you have questions.